Husband caught wife cheating, secretly videotaped it, and plotted a surprising long-term revenge. Brian, newly promoted to shift foreman, was thrilled with his night shift schedule, which allowed him to attend his son's school events without interfering with his work. He took a few days off to work on a small apartment above his garage, creating a peaceful daytime retreat. While he was working, Brian heard unexpected noises coming from inside the house. Brenda was supposed to be at work and their son Tim was visiting her parents, so no one should have been home. Curious, Brian moved toward the noise coming from her bedroom, settling over an old air conditioning vent that Brenda had complained about before and that he hadn't removed after installing a new one. Peering through the vent after moving some insulation, Brian's heart sank as he saw Brenda with another man. Shocked and hurt he couldn't look away. After a few minutes he regained his composure, pulled out his phone and discreetly recorded the scene through the vent. "Does your husband ever satisfy you or is he lacking?" asked the man. "I've asked you not to mention Brian." Brenda objected, but Brian thought her protest sounded feeble. "This isn't about him. He's a good lover and a great father," she continued. "I'm sure he's still here. I'm about to be intimate with you in his bed," she continued. "I'm about to be intimate with you in his bed and you claim to be satisfied with him. Something doesn't add up. I don't know why I let you convince me to do this right here, right there. We won't get caught at your place. I'm about to climax," moaned Brenda. The guy on top of Brenda suddenly tensed. They stayed still for a moment before Brian saw him roll off his wife. "See how exciting it is when we take risks," Brenda's lover remarked. "Being intimate at my place is good, but doing it in your marital bed takes it up a notch." Brian recognized Brenda's lover as Bill Grant, a driver at the delivery company where they both worked. He had recently gone through a divorce and had a daughter in high school. "That sounds risky," Brenda replied without any real emotion. "You wanted to be in my bed just to beat Brian. It's not some kind of competition for men." "It kind of is." Grant chuckled softly. "You're hot, but knowing you're married and I'm with you in your husband's bed makes me feel like I've won." "It's a thrill." "It wouldn't be so thrilling if Brian caught us. I shouldn't have agreed to this and it won't happen again. I'm worried Brian will find out. It would ruin my marriage." Brenda confessed. "Let's make a deal," Grant proposed. "As long as you keep your husband in the dark we won't do it in his bed, but once he's back in the game we'll have to return so I can regain my top spot. I can't shut Brian out. He's my husband. I can't just stop being intimate with him," Brenda reasoned. "He's a man and wants a regular bedroom life. I'll try to discourage him from wanting intimacy and limit our rendezvous to my bedroom. I dread the thought of what would happen if Brian ever caught us." Brian had parked his truck in a separate garage, out of sight. Brenda didn't know he was home, let alone that he was listening to their conversation from the attic. Brian was reeling. After discovering his wife's affair, he decided not to confront Brenda, choosing instead to focus on their son, Tim, who was still in high school. Brenda's feelings no longer mattered to him. Determined not to let a cheater enjoy the house he had spent 15 years renovating, Brian planned to stay until Tim graduated. He accelerated the renovation of his apartment above the garage, planning to turn it into a comfortable living space with a kitchen and bathroom where he could stay until Tim went to college. Brian decided to prioritize Tim's college fund, and once it was secure, he would begin to rebuild his own life, no longer bound by loyalty to Brenda. When Brenda came home and saw him in the kitchen, Brian was composed. "You're home early. Did something happen?" she asked. Watching her now, he noticed her aging and wondered why he hadn't seen these changes before, realizing it was probably his love that had blinded him. He felt sad. "Yeah, things are a bit icy at work. They've asked me to do some night shifts for a while, starting tonight. They're letting me come home to pack a lunch and rest. I'll come back later," Brian explained. "They shouldn't make you work at night after a day shift, even with some time off during the day," Brenda reasoned. "You'll be exhausted. At least lie down and get some sleep for a few hours." "Good idea," Brian agreed. "I'll just lie down between the sheets and wait," Brenda interrupted loudly, remembering the condition of the bed. "I just realized I need to wash the sheets." "Okay," Brian replied calmly, chuckling to himself at Brenda's discomfort. "I'll just use the bed in the guest room. No need to get upset." Brian left the house pretending to go to work, but instead he watched a baseball game at a sports bar and later snuck into his future apartment to sleep on an air mattress. Brian's usual work schedule ran from Sunday through Thursday nights, with weekends off, so Brenda was puzzled to see him set up to sleep in the guest room on Friday, his usual night off. "Why are you sleeping in the guest room? Since we won't see much of each other during your night shifts, why not sleep in our bed?" Brenda asked, puzzled. "Since I worked last night and got a few hours of sleep this morning while you were at work. I'm not very tired. I'm planning on watching a baseball game and maybe a movie afterwards," Brian explained, sticking to his prepared excuse. "I'm trying to get used to staying awake at night and sleeping in the morning. I don't want to disturb your sleep unless you're up for some action," Brian suggested, wiggling his eyebrows suggestively. Brenda's reaction was exactly what Brian would have expected if he hadn't overheard their conversation. With her lover, he might have missed her brief, love in the headlights look before she smiled weakly. "I'm pretty tired tonight. Maybe we could just cuddle a little and go to sleep, Brenda suggested, plus Tim's home tonight or he might hear us cuddling. Won't do it for me, Brian replied. If intimacy is off the table, I'll just sleep in the guest room to avoid temptation. You've never worried about Tim hearing us before, so that's just an excuse you don't have to make up. I'm not the type to pressure a woman. I know that, Brian. You're right, it was a weak excuse and I'm sorry, I'm just tired and not feeling romantic. I hope you understand. Brenda apologized. I understand more than you think. Let me know when you're in the mood. If I'm feeling it too, we could hook up. Good night, Brian replied as he headed for the guest room, leaving Brenda with a confused look on her face. Sunday night he confidently began his new role as shift foreman. Monday morning, Brenda was at work and construction had begun on his apartment. After a quick talk with the foreman, Brian managed to fall asleep despite the noise and occasional phone calls. Annoyed that he had forgotten to mute the landline in the guest room, Brian groggily answered the phone. "Hello. Sorry to wake you," Brian said to his mother. His wife, Law Beverly, "I just wanted to let you know that Bill and I heard about your night shifts and we'll make sure not to bother you. If you need any help with Tim while you're sleeping, just give us a call." Brian ended the call without a word, shaking his head at people's obliviousness as he unplugged the phone. It took him a while, but he did it. He drifted back to sleep. The construction crew finished their work in less than a week, leaving Brian impressed with their efficiency. He reflected on how long it would have taken him to do the same job. He marveled at their speed. On Friday afternoon he went to a furniture store and ordered the essentials for his new space: a king-size bed, a small kitchen table, and 4 chairs. Size bed, a small kitchen table with 4 chairs, and a compact sofa. Then he visited an appliance store to pick out a large flat-screen TV, a refrigerator, an oven, and a microwave. By Monday afternoon, his bachelor pad, as he called it, would be ready for him to move in full-time. Brian chuckled at Brenda's puzzled expression when she returned home on Monday to find a crew working around their detached garage. She pulled him aside for an explanation. "I need to finish an apartment above the garage," Brian revealed. "I need a quiet place to sleep during the day without interruption. It will be soundproofed and won't even have a landline when I work at night. I figured it would be easier for everyone if I had my own place. I'll still be around for Tim's baseball practices and games, and we'll have dinner together," Brian assured her. "But I mentioned a few days ago about being available for some special time together. Are you asking me to fulfill that tonight? You're acting like a real a-hole. Marriage is about more than just closeness. Than just closeness, we expect communication, romance, and sharing our thoughts and problems. It's not just about sex, you know?" "Don't lecture me about marriage," warned Brian. "I put effort into this marriage just like you do. This arrangement will work fine. Just let me know when you want me in bed. I'm not some object to be serviced." "Brenda, you're not getting anything until you apologize sincerely, and I expect a nice dinner out. As part of that apology you're a whole." Brian grinned and walked away, leaving Brenda confused. While he made it easy to keep Bill Grant away, Brenda was worried about Brian's behavior. He wasn't his usual self and seemed to be ignoring her, which concerned her. He had always been attentive before he decided to give Brian a memorable night. Once he apologized. Brenda apologized. She was sure he wouldn't last much longer without intimacy. She knew he wouldn't lose interest in it. He'd always been eager for it since they'd met. By the following Wednesday, Brian was fully settled into his new apartment. With the upcoming Labor Day weekend he had 3 nights off. Tim's junior year would start the following Tuesday. "How would you both like to go to a Diamondbacks game this weekend?" Brian asked at dinner on Thursday. "They're playing the Dodgers and it's a big series for them." "Seriously, that sounds great, thanks, Dad," Tim exclaimed. "I'm not a big baseball fan," Brenda complained. "I'll pass on the game and find something to do at home." "I bet you will," Brian muttered. Brian, just loud enough for Brenda to hear. "It's settled, then Tim and I will go to the Saturday night game." "Wow, I've got to tell Scooter about this," exclaimed Tim. "He'll be so jealous. He's a huge Dodger fan and used to live in LA. Why not invite him to come along?" suggested Brian. "Watching baseball with friends, especially fellow fans, makes it more fun." "I'll call him right now, thanks, Dad," said Tim eagerly as he dashed off to get his phone. "You really made Tim's day," remarked Brenda. "Baseball's a great way for you to bond with the boys. Horace seems like a nice kid." "Wait, his real name is Horace?" Brian asked incredulously. "No wonder he goes by Scooter. Who names their kid Horace unless they're trying to torture him?" "To torture him?" Tim mentioned that Horace's dad died of a brain aneurysm 2 years ago, Brenda explained, brushing off Brian's comment about the name. "They moved here this summer to be closer to his grandparents who aren't doing well. I'll stick with Scooter and forget I ever heard Horace," Brian declared as Tim rushed back into the room. On Saturday afternoon Tim parked his truck in front of a nice ranch house in a good neighborhood. Before he could even come to a stop, Scooter bolted out the door and jumped into the truck next to Tim. "Hey Mr. Welker, my mom wants to meet you before we go," Scooter explained. "I guess she wants to make sure you're not an offensive person or something." "Sorry about that," no worries, Brian said as he got out of the truck and walked to the door, then rang the bell. A slender woman about Brian's age opened the door. Brian noticed her legs, which he thought were her best feature. They looked strong and well-shaped in running shorts. Shapely in running shorts, he couldn't help but admire them. Her stomach was flat and her top barely separated from her torso. Do you think my legs look good compared to everything else? Scooter's mom asked, teasing Brian. Yeah, they look great, Brian agreed, catching her playful grin. You've got nice legs. She continued. Do you think I should let my son go to a baseball game with a guy who checks out every woman he sees? Brian knew she was teasing him, so he decided to go along with it. What you're really asking is if you should let your son go anywhere with a guy, since checking out women is part of being a guy, Brian joked with a grin. He needs to learn to appreciate women. I'll teach him what to look for. Teach him what to look for. I hope you'll be more subtle during these lessons, the woman replied, still smiling. The first lesson will be to slap anyone who calls him Horace, except you of course, Ryan joked back. I see, so my son will learn to be assertive and appreciate women's legs, she remarked. Not only that, Brian replied, I'll teach him how to judge discreetly and appreciate all aspects of women, not just one. Of women, not just one. Great, thanks, Scooter's mom said with more respect for Brian. Have a good time, and if you're late make sure Scooter gives me a call. By the way, my name is Gertrude. Seriously, Gertrude, what do your friends call you? Brian asked. About my guy friends, I go by Minx, Raven, Candy, or Bubbles. My girlfriends call me Gertrude, she replied with a straight face. Sounds good for me, I'm Brian. Good for me, I'm Brian. Since we're going to be friends I'll call you Minx. I kind of like that name, Brian said. Why am I not surprised? Gertrude chuckled before laughing heartily. Horace can go with you anytime. I love your sense of humor. Tim is very polite, so I knew his parents would be fine. Thanks for inviting him to the game. We're big baseball fans. I used to go to as many Dodgers home games as I could. My dad used to go to as many Dodgers home games as I could. My dad even played in the minor leagues before I was born. He was pretty good, just not quite good enough, Gertrude added. Scooter's a great kid, so it's not a problem. I'll keep an eye on him and make sure he comes back home in one piece. Mink, have a nice day. Are you serious about calling me Mink? I was joking, Gertrude protested. You'll always be Mink to me, Brian. Brian had a relaxing day at the game. Scooter caught a foul ball, and both boys ate too many hot dogs and drank too much soda, falling asleep in the back of the truck before Brian could leave the parking lot. When they reached Scooter's home, Brian gently woke the sleepy teen and walked him to the front door where Gertrude was waiting. With a smile, Brian admitted that he may have had a little too much food and soda. Of course he did, it's all part of the ball game, Gertrude replied. Thanks for picking him up and bringing him back safely. It was my pleasure. Scooter's a great kid, Mrs. Bryant said. I'll see you at the boys' games. Brian found a routine that worked well for him. He would come home, grab a quick breakfast, and then snooze from 9 o'clock to 3. Thanks to extra insulation and blackout curtains, his sleep was usually deep and undisturbed. Brenda often complained about Brian napping in his man cave on weekends, but she'd stop if he helped around the house. Brian sensed her worry about being caught by Grant in their bedroom, which suggested she wasn't considering divorce. With his plan to stay married until Tim graduated, Brian's new role as foreman was easier physically, so he bought a home gym and kept up with regular workouts. He attended all of Tim's baseball practices and eventually coached some kids as well. Scooter, initially shy but talented, blossomed with Brian's extra coaching and became a key player by mid-season. As Tim and Scooter's friendship grew, Brian found himself spending more time with Scooter's mother, Gertrude, who was witty and sharp, he thought. I hope I'm not out of line here, Minx, but I need to ask you something, Brian began almost awkwardly. Gertrude quickly replied, I'm lost. Brian admitted, well, when a guy says he has a personal question, isn't it usually about a woman's bust size? Gert replied with a chuckle, yes, usually. Brian chuckled back, but in this case I wanted to know if you've noticed some of the moms treating me differently lately. Do you think they've been friendlier? Wow, you're quite the observer, girl replied. You really don't know what's going on, huh? I'd need more details on the what before I could answer that, Brian pondered. I get it. Baseball rules, like the infield fly rule, but I don't think you're talking about that, are you? No, I was referring to the unwritten rule of not bunting or stealing bases with a big lead, Gert quipped before getting serious. If you'd been paying attention, you'd notice that the friendliest moms are the single ones. You're a great dad, good looking, and have a decent job. What about me being married? Wouldn't that matter? Brian asked. They thought about it. Ger replied. That's why they haven't tried to seduce you. No one's made a move, right? No one's tried. Not that it would be a problem. Brian replied. I'm married, so obviously I'm not a catch for anyone. Brian, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but we're pals, so it's on me. All moms know your wife is stepping out on you, but it gets worse. Word is she's cutting you off in the bedroom. You two aren't sharing a bed, and it's pretty clear you're headed for a breakup soon. These ladies want to scoop you up for their team once you're single." Gert's bombshell left Brian reeling. How did everyone know his private life? Who could be privy to his bedroom details? Then it hit him. Brenda must have spilled the beans to that jerk about us. "Are you talking about your wife or her beau?" Gert asked, trying to lighten the mood. "You seem oddly calm about all this gossip. Did you suspect Brenda was cheating?" "No, I never saw it coming," Brian replied. "You had no idea?" Gert asked incredulously. "I knew she was cheating, but I never suspected it," Brian clarified. "I'm lost. How can you know without suspecting?" "I went from clueless to certain when I caught Grant in bed with Brenda. I skipped suspicion altogether," Brian explained. "Well, that's a twist. You caught them in the act, yet you're still hitched and not in jail. You're not into open relationships, are you, or some voyeur girl press concern?" "No way, that's not me," Brian assured her. "I decided to change priorities. Spending quality time with Tim, being a full-time dad, became my focus. Living with Brenda instead of splitting up seemed like the best way to accomplish that. I started working nights, which put a damper on our bed life. I built a cute apartment over the garage so I could sleep during the day without hassle." She wasn't thrilled with the sleeping arrangement, but Grant made it clear that every time she slept with me, he demanded to use our bed for their trick. It bothered her, but not enough to stop. When she sees him, she's convinced her affair is a secret and wants to keep it that way. I haven't told her, but I won't be close to her anymore. I've been tested for STDs and I'm clean. I want to keep it that way. Seriously, you heard what Gertrude saw. How could she treat you so badly? And that guy's a total jerk. All the single moms think you'd be a real catch. I think you're overestimating my appeal. I've never been the heartthrob type, but having a solid job might make me more attractive. A solid job might make me more attractive to some desperate women, Brian suggested. Are you kidding? Look at you, you're handsome with a beautiful smile, Gertrude pointed out. You're strong, kind, smart and great with kids. If I wasn't so plain and flat-chested, I might have made a move along with my barely there a cup. I think I'd better stop talking. Thanks for being straight with me about what people are saying and thinking, Brian responded. I didn't know everyone knew about my situation. It's embarrassing. I can't even keep my own wife happy. I feel like a total wimp. You're a good guy who wants to be a good dad to his son. You're tough enough to handle this crap so you can have a solid bond with Tim, and Horace thinks you're pretty cool, Gertrude assured him, who Brian asked. You must feel better if you're teasing me about Horace's name, Gertrude noted with a grin. You're a great friend. You've kept me from sinking too deep into my own misery. I just hope Tim doesn't get wind of this, Brian confessed. That ship has either sailed or is about to, Gertrude revealed. Aura says Tim knows things are not right at home. You're mostly avoiding his mother. Heck, he's bound to pick up on something with so many people in the know. You know what's on my mind, Gertrude chimed in. Horace. Tim's got a crush on Heather Grant. It's embarrassing for him and me. She's a good girl, clueless about what a jerk her dad is. I'm just relieved Tim's not chasing after Heather, Brian commented. Orthat, be a mess. I'll take what I can get. Horace says Tim's got his eye on Holly Ingram, which isn't surprising. She's at every game cheering him on, Gertrude said with a grin. Yeah, I've seen her around. Nice kid. I knew her family growing up. Brian recalled. They're good people. Good people. 2 nights later, the Timk team was playing in the district championships. Brian realized he was more nervous than Tim. It didn't help that 3 single moms were vying for his attention. Norma Wilson wore a revealing top that showed off her ample cleavage. She kept leaning in front of Brian, catching his eye. Brandy Dorn in a tight sweater asked Brian about the team. Her curves accentuated. Jillian Patterson was less subtle, pressing her chest against Brian's arm. Her chest against Brian's arm. Gertrude smiled knowingly as she handed him snacks. Brian noticed the 3 women leave suddenly, then heard a familiar voice behind him. I thought I'd join my husband this afternoon to watch our son play. I didn't expect to have to navigate through so many fans to get to him, Brenda remarked a little loudly. What's going on here? The game hasn't started yet, but Tim seems solid in batting practice. Brian replied, trying to change the subject. Brenda, I'm sorry. I'm late. Trying to change the subject. Nice try, Brenda replied. Why were those women swarming around you like bees to honey? Good thing you're not allergic to silicone. If you're asking me to decipher the female mind, I'm clueless, Brian admitted. I'm even surprised to see you here. My son's in a big game. I'm here to support him. Obviously other moms are here too. Seems like some of them are more interested in you than the game, Brenda replied. You've been busy lately. You haven't been able to make it to the games. How are you managing to get away today? Brian observed. Brenda glanced at Brian, wondering if he was hinting at something with his mention of her obligations, but she quickly dismissed the thought. If he suspected anything, he would confront her more aggressively. Brian wouldn't just let her cheat. If he knew, he would make it known. I made time. Tim's game is important. So it's important to me. I haven't seen much of you since you started the night shift, so I thought it would be nice to spend some time together cheering on Tim, Brenda explained. As Brenda settled into the bleachers for her first game, she noticed unfriendly stares from some of the other moms, puzzled since she hadn't met them before. then she saw Gertrude looking casual yet striking with her styled hair and shorts. The game started and Brian was fixated on the field. Tim was up to bat and hit a double, followed by Scooter, who looked stronger than last season. Scooter's hit sent the ball over the fence, sparking cheers as he and Tim rounded the bases. Gur-SC beamed with pride for her son, while Brian, touched by the boys' success, had tears in his eyes as he reflected on the hard work he'd put into coaching them. After the game, Brenda drove to the pizza place where the team was celebrating. Finding a parking space a short distance away, she walked in to see Brian surrounded by Norma Wilson and Brandy Dorn, who were a little too close for comfort. As Brenda approached, they quickly backed away, the scene reminding her of a recent conversation with her lover Bill Grant. "Isn't it time we use your bed again?" Bill had suggested to Ed as Brenda was getting dressed after a romp. "Getting it on in your husband's bed really gets me going, but you?" "He promised not to until Brian and I did," Brenda reminded him. "I don't want to take the chance." "Wait, are you saying you haven't done it since the last time we were together?" Bill asked incredulously. "You said you'd keep him on hold until he made a move. He's been working night shifts ever since, sleeping in the garage room. We haven't even had a hug since." "That's ridiculous," Bill scoffed. "He's too young and you're too attractive for him to lose interest, isn't he?" "Not straight or seeing someone else. He's definitely not gay," Brenda insisted. "He's very manly and loyal. He's just tired from working nights and only comes over for dinner on weekends. He's busy with yard work and stuff. Any normal guy married to someone as attractive as you wouldn't willingly give up even with long hours. He must be fooling around. That should make it easier for us to hook up. He's getting his and I'm getting mine." "What used to be his? Brian would never cheat on me," Brenda firmly stated. "He takes our marriage vows seriously. He's not the type to sneak around and have some cheap affair." "Is that what you're doing?" Bill demanded. "Well, not exactly. This is just temporary. He's been busy with work at Tim's baseball game, so he hasn't been paying much attention to me. I deserve a little fun. I work hard, managing the house, cooking meals, and holding down a full-time job." "We know this won't last." Bill grinned as he pondered Brenda's explanation. "I guess you're right. Let's enjoy it while it lasts. Give me a day when I can have you in your bed." Said "It still turns me on." As Brenda remembered Bill's words, she grew concerned as she watched the two women flirting with Brian slink away. It was clear he had some attractive women interested in him. She realized she needed to protect her marriage from these women's advances. Then she spotted Gertrude sitting alone. Brenda quickly devised a plan. She put on a friendly smile and sat down next to a surprised Gertrude. "It's good to see you." Gertrude Orus has become quite the ball player and he's such a nice boy. You must be proud of him. "I am," Gertrude cautiously admitted. "Tim is doing great. Brian's time with them is paying off too. Hek has been a wonderful mentor to Horace." "Yes, sometimes Brian is just too nice," Brenda remarked, taking the opportunity to make her request. "You've probably noticed how those blondes always hang around him. I thought maybe you could help me out. I know Brian wouldn't stray under normal circumstances, but he's a man and those women practically throw themselves at him. I can't make it to most of the games and practices because of work and other commitments," Brenda explained, "but I trust Brian with you and you're not his type at all, so if you could just stick with him when I'm not around, I'd really appreciate it. I'm planning on suggesting to Brian that he stay closer to you and be more attentive," Brenda continued. "These women might back off if they think he's settled on you. I know it might be awkward for you, but it's for a good cause. You could help save our marriage." "Let me make sure I understand this," Gertrude replied incredulously. "You're worried that these attractive single mothers might tempt Brian, so you want me to be with him? You think I'm a safe choice because I'm not so flashy? I didn't mean to imply that you're boring. I just know Brian. He's less likely to be swayed by you than by some busty ex-cheerleader type." Brenda clarified that you'd be helping him stay faithful. "Do you think cheating is unforgivable?" "I adore my husband, but cheating is a total deal breaker for me. It breaks the marriage contract. I can't accept infidelity. That would mean the end of our marriage. You know how strongly I feel about that. You were married for years. I value loyalty and fidelity. It's logical." "Can I count on you to keep an eye on him when I'm not around?" Brenda asked. "Absolutely," Gertrude replied with a smile. "Make sure you explain everything to Brian." "I'll do my part." "I might not have put it quite like that, but you've got it pretty well summed up. Thanks again," Brenda said as she left to join her husband. "Last night, Brenda had a serious talk with me before I went to work," Brian started at the next day's practice. "The main point was that she's worried about she thinks I'd be safer if I stayed close to you, Minx, or as she likes to call you, Gertrude. Somehow, that doesn't make me feel very safe." Gert joked. "Minx, you're one of the most beautiful women I've ever met," Brian replied sincerely. "You've got it all, not just artificial enhancements." "You're really making my job harder," Gertrude blushed. "I may have to schedule an eye exam for you after the baseball season is over. I have 20/20 vision and I'm usually spot on at judging people, except for one thing." Ryan was amused by the reaction of the single mothers as Mink stayed close to him. They spent a good deal of time chatting and joking. The mother seemed surprised and then disappointed. It didn't take long for Mink to stand out from the crowd. The team had a long drive to Middleburg for their next game, so they decided to leave the day before and stay in a hotel, hoping it would help the boys stay fresh for the game. Brian gave rides to Jake Winston's folks and Mink's, talking about the team's chances on the way. Full of optimism, when they arrived they found themselves right behind the team bus. Winston's volunteered to chaperone the boys and would be staying at the same hotel. Others had to book elsewhere due to the busy city with multiple games. Before Tim boarded the bus, Brian told him he would be staying at a different hotel and reminded him to behave for the coaches and chaperones. "What hotel are you staying at, Mink's?" Brian asked as they approached the team hotel. "Same as yours," she replied simply, "but I never mentioned which hotel I booked. How do you find out? How do you know we're staying at the same hotel?" "It's pretty crowded this weekend, you might have trouble finding a room at the last minute," Brian observed. "I'm sure something will work out," Gertrude replied with a wide grin, leaving Brian puzzled. A few minutes later, Brian arrived at his hotel and suggested to Gertrude, "Minks, want to see if you can snag a room while I check in? I can hang around to make sure you find something." "Thanks, but I'll just wait here, I'll be fine," she insisted. As Brian checked in and got his room key, he returned to his truck to find Minks waiting. "Would you like one of these maps to my room?" he offered. "It is room 207. "What a sweet gesture," Minks exclaimed as she accepted the key and kissed Brian on the cheek. "Let's hit the hay, it's going to be a long night." The next morning Brian felt more tired than when he first hit the sack. He was struggling to break up his marriage vows with his wife Gertrude. He was tired, he was tired, he was tired, he was tired. He struggled with breaking his marriage vows, but Minks helped him see it differently. "Leighton, think this through. Brenda not only cheated, but she cut you off. Even if she hadn't, she's risking your health with an unprotected axe. Basically, she's made being close to her unsafe and unattractive. She's released you from your vows and marriage contract. I've been celibate for over 2 years. I'm clean after regular checkups. You got tested after you found out she was cheating, and you're clean. And you're clean. I even started birth control over a month ago, hoping we could be together. Can you give me one reason we shouldn't be together? Is it my looks? Your wife thought I'd be a good match against all those busty women because she knew you wouldn't be into me. Am I just not attractive enough?" "Minks, you're incredibly attractive, don't doubt that for a second. I've never strayed from Brenda and it's a mental shift. But you've made a solid case for us being together. I'm all in," Brian declared with a grin. "Before we go any further, there's something you should know," Minks replied. "Both my parents are in hospice care and probably won't be around much longer. My brother's been sending game tapes of Horace to his friend who happens to be the baseball coach at a top prep school in LA. If Horace gets a baseball scholarship next year, we might move back there. I really like you, but we're not talking about a long-term thing here. It just wouldn't work. Look at us. You're a good-looking married guy with a cheating spouse. And I'm just a regular woman with a son who might have a shot at an athletic scholarship. I have to do what's best for Horace," she explained. "That's fantastic news about Scooter," Brian said proudly. "He's a great kid and a talented player, and I'm glad he'll have a chance to improve his game against tough competition and get a good education. The effort you've put in with him, it's funny how you being a mentor to my son is giving us the chance to move back to A and away from you. I'm not sure I'd be good at a one-night stand kind of thing," Brian admitted. "Maybe it's better to just skip closeness altogether than have a one-night fling and go back to celibacy." "You're being silly," Mink said. "I mentioned we might move back to LA in 6 months for the school year. That's a long time away. A guy could have a lot of fun in 6 months, unless he's too old for a regular dose of steamy action with a very eager woman. We'll just have to see about that." "Are you going to live up to your nickname, Mink?" Brian teased. "I'm going to do my best for you, big boy," Mink promised. "Whenever you want me, just whistle and I'll teach you how to whistle." "I've always been told I'm a pretty good whistler," Brian joked. "Then you're definitely not doing it right," Gertrude shot back. The baseball team won the state championship. Unfortunately, both of Gertrude's parents passed away before Thanksgiving within a week of each other. Brian and Tim attended their funerals, where Brian met Gertrude's brother, Dexter, and immediately hit it off. "Brian, this is my brother, Dexter." Gertrude introduced Dexter to Brian, who has been a mentor to Horace and a good friend to us. "Brian, your name is Dexter." "That's right," agreed Gertrude's brother, "but everyone else calls me Grim. Only Gertrude and our parents ever call me Dexter." "So what do you call my sister?" "I call her Minks, but it's a long story," Brian said. "I don't think I need to ask." Grim chuckled. Brian spent Thanksgiving with Brenda and Tim at their parents' house for the first time in a while. Brian found himself getting ready for bed with Brenda. They always stayed over on Thanksgiving night and Brian couldn't do it. Thanksgiving night and Brian couldn't think of a good reason to break that tradition. It's been ages since we've been together, Brenda murmured. You must be in need of some affection by now. Make love to me. Brian felt a pang of guilt at his next words. So you're finally admitting you need some attention. I knew you'd come around. I'll be happy to take care of you and put a smile on your face for the holiday today. You heartless jerk with that attitude. You, Brenda snapped. What's gotten into you? Just forget about touching me. Fine, Brian replied simply as he turned away from Brenda. It wasn't like him to say something so harsh, but it did the job of avoiding closeness with her. Still, Brian couldn't shake the regret of how far his marriage had fallen. Brenda felt uneasy after Brian's sharp remark, which made it hard for her to fall asleep as she lay next to him. She wondered if he was upset. She wondered if he was upset because they hadn't been intimate lately, or if he somehow knew about her affair. She realized that she needed to have a serious talk with Bill. She couldn't keep denying Brian closeness, especially after her slip-up about being in her marital bed with Bill, which could raise suspicions and damage their marriage. Brian had a set routine for his night shift. He'd come home, grab a light breakfast, and go to bed by 9 a.m. Often he'd wake up around 2 a.m. to find Minx in bed with him. They'd spend an hour together before she'd head home to be there when Scooter got back from school. With baseball season over, Brian could focus on being fresh and ready when Tim got back from school, after which he'd usually take a quick nap before heading to work. Overall, the arrangement worked well for both of them. Brian and Minx. One night in early December, Tim called his dad. Brian, just after he started his shift at work. Dad, Scooter and I are hanging out with Heather and Holly in Heather's car. They said we could stay out until midnight since there's no school tomorrow. We're stuck on D Street and I'm getting a little worried. I see a couple of guys by the arcade looking over this way. You're stranded on D Street by the arcade. Damn it, Brian, we'll talk about this later. Is Heather driving that Corolla? Yeah, it's a 2017 Corolla, Tim replied quickly. I'll grab a wheel and tire that fits. Head over. Keep your doors locked and call the cops if you get caught. Brian put down his phone and walked to the production floor where he spotted Gus driving a Corolla. Gus, you still have that Corolla, right? Brian asked the bearded man operating a forklift. I need a tire that fits your car and I need it now. While talking to Gus, Brian saw Jack Reynolds walk by. Jack was Holly's uncle and his sister was Holly's mother. Jack, my son and some friends are stuck on D Street with a flat tire and no spare. Holly's with them. I'll get a tire from Gus and head over. Could you come with me? I've got a real spare, not one of those flimsy donuts, Gus said firmly. Let's take my car and get there quickly. With Jack, Gus and Brian were on their way. They were worried about the kids being in that part of town. Late at night it was not a safe area, especially for teenage girls. Brenda lay in bed feeling the warmth from her time with Bill. His phone rang and he saw it was Heather calling. Ah, damn it, it's Heather. I have to pick it up or she'll keep bugging me. Bill said check the caller ID. Brenda only got Bill's side of the conversation but was curious about what she heard. Why are you all down there? Well, that's unfortunate. These guys should be able to handle a little problem like that. Call AAA. It's not my fault your mom doesn't carry a spare tire. What was that about? Brenda asked as Bill hung up. Nothing to worry about, Bill replied, reaching over to touch Brenda's breast. Heather's got a flat, but she's getting help from Tria. As Brian and his buddies pulled up behind Heather's car, they spotted some tough-looking guys nearby. Brian got out, grabbed the tools from Gus's trunk, and Gus brought out the spare. Jack, signaling to Heather to roll down her window, you guys stay put till we fix the tire. If those idiots give us any trouble, we'll take care of it. And Holly, you need to explain to your mom why you're out on the street, Jack said. Brian positioned the jack under the flat tire, cranked it tight, then moved away. The leader of the tough guys approached Jack claiming it was their turf. Before Jack could respond, Brian swung the tire iron, hitting the guy in the shins. He fell to his knees cursing as Brian sat on him and continued to loosen the nuts. The two closest gang members hurried over looking as if to help their fallen leader. Jack quickly punched the first one in the head, knocking him down instantly. Gus moved forward, causing the second guy to retreat out of his reach. Raise the car a little and I'll take off this tire, Brian told Jack calmly. Jack cranked the car up as the gang members shouted insults and curses. Occasionally the guy under Brian would try to move. But Brian grabbed his hair, lifted his head slightly, and pushed him back down to the ground. After 2 tries, the guy decided to stay put. Brian removed the lug nuts and took off the flat tire. Gus handed him the good tire and he put it on after hand tightening all the nuts. Brian tightened the nuts and stood up, accidentally kicking the leader in the groin as he stepped over him. You got something to say? Brian asked as he walked towards the gang, twirling the tire iron casually as he approached the scattered group. Get out of here you kids, Jack shouted as he backed the gang away from the car. Watch out, don't run over those fools lying in the street and stay away from this area. The 3 men got back into Gus's car and followed Heather's car as it drove towards the kids' neighborhood. I can't believe you hit that fool in the shins, Gus laughed. He went down like a ton of bricks. Thanks for coming with me, Jack said. My hand hurts, but it felt good to knock him out. It hurts, but it felt good to hit that punk in the head. Boy, you really sat on that guy while you were fixing his tie. Gus laughed. It was a blast to watch. The men continued to laugh and talk about their adventure as they went back to work that morning. The whole plant had heard the story. The next afternoon Brian awoke to find Mink jumping into bed and kissing him passionately. She was naked and clearly excited. Horace filled me in on what happened last night. You were amazing. Thanks for looking after the kids like that, Mink gushed. You're in. I would have come sooner, but I had to wait for Horace and Tim to see the girls, since they're off school today. Meanwhile, Brenda had just started her shift when Sue Blaine approached her at the water cooler, looking like she had something to say. I heard about how Brian, Jack Reynolds and Gus Benson handled those troublemakers from the kids. Car on D Street, a good whack with a tire iron puts those punks in their place pretty quickly, Sue said. Brenda quickly connected the dots. Last night, Heather had called her dad for help and he had brushed her off. Apparently the situation was more serious than Bill had let on. Since Sue mentioned kids, it probably involved Holly along with Horace and Brenda's son Tim. Son Tim, I'm interested in what you heard, Brenda replied. I want to see if the rumors add up. As Sue recounted the rumors, Brenda was angry with Bill Grant, though she didn't show it to Sue. His daughter had reached out to him in a dangerous situation and he had ignored her. Brian along with Gus and Holly's uncle Jack had stepped up like real men. To discover that she was involved with a man who wouldn't help his own daughter and her friends, including Tim, hurt her deeply. She wondered how far she had fallen. Brian's character was 10 times worse than Bill's. Brenda had always known this, which made her wonder why she had gotten involved with such a man. A selfish guy. In the break room that afternoon, Brenda found Bill alone, snacking while his truck was being repaired. She didn't hold back. Heather went to you for help last night and you brushed her off. Those kids could have been in real trouble and you just told her to call Tria. What kind of dad does that? It turned out fine, Bill said casually. Your husband and his buddies handled it, so what's the problem? Brian acted like a man. You abandoned your own daughter. That's the problem. My son was with them. If your lame husband is so great, why am I the one who gets close to you when he's been out of luck for months? A man isn't about size, Brenda retorted. Hek is more of a man than you'll ever be. You say that, but last night you made love to me. In my opinion, I've outdone that wimp in every way that counts, replied Bill, casually taking another sip of his soda. That's it, Brenda declared firmly. We're done. Don't even try to talk to me again. I don't want anything to do with you, no matter what. Bill calmly replied, there are plenty of married women out there who would love a guy like me. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. I'd still be willing to be intimate with you if you asked nicely. Brenda burst into tears and hurried out of the room. She had cheated on her husband, disrespected him, and jeopardized her marriage and family for a shallow, self-centered person. Minx had just brought Brian to a satisfying conclusion when she heard sniffling behind her. Surprised, Minx turned around to see Brenda looking at her, tears streaming down her face. How could you do this to me? She sobbed. Brenda, I trusted you both, and now this. I'm just following your orders, Minx replied calmly, slipping into her clothes after she had silenced Brian with a gesture. You wanted me to keep those busty blondes away from Brian. I sacrificed myself to achieve your goals. I didn't want you to sleep with him, and you know it, Brenda shot back, her tears turning to anger. I can't believe Brian would cheat on me. I can't believe that Brian would cheat on me like that, especially with a skinny girl. I understand it's hard to hear that Brian and I are intimate, but there's no need to be rude. Minx thought your husband was ready to burst. I'm just helping him release the tension he's been feeling. Bill Grant didn't want you to be close to your husband, so Brian had to turn to someone else. Luckily, I was there at the right time, and you should be grateful to me for helping you cut Brian off completely and keeping Bill happy. Speaking of Bill, where is he? Is he in bed with you? Do you know about Bill? Brenda exclaimed. Well, yes, Minx, I think almost everyone knows about Bill. In your own bed, every time you slept with Brian, you were no longer close to your husband. Luckily, Bill filled that void, pun intended. If Brian knew, why didn't he say anything? Why did he let Bill and I go on for so long? Brenda asked, tears still streaming down her cheeks. He'd probably get really angry and yell at me, then he'd probably divorce me, Brenda said as she faced the harsh truth. That sounds about right. So what happens next? Would Brian and Tim stay here while you move in with Bill? Minx asked calmly. I'm not leaving my home. Tim stays with me. If Brian wants to leave, he's the one who has to go. He'd have to pay child support and alimony, Brenda concluded. That's not fair. Brian wanted to stay close to Tim and be the best dad he could be. How could he do that? Minx asked. By not splitting up, Brenda muttered. He stayed for Tim, not for me. When he found out about Bill and me, he mentally checked out of our marriage. We've been living like this for years. We've been divorced for ages, haven't we? I was just too blind to see it. In your defense, you had Bill clouding your vision, making it hard to see that your husband was already emotionally gone. I'm just the girl who came along after you screwed everything up. I helped Brian heal. I broke it off with Bill. I never want to see him again. Brenda stated that was after he left his daughter in a jam last night, wasn't it? I didn't have much choice, Em remarked. Even cheaters have their limits. Are you and Brian moving in together now? Brenda asked, wiping away her tears. We're pretty comfortable with things the way they are. Oris and I are heading back to LA before school starts. I'd rather he not find out his mom is dating his best friend's dad, if I can help it. When it's time for me to go, I could help Brian find someone new if he wants. Mink revealed you. See, I didn't steal your husband like those other moms wanted. We're just spending time together for now, kind of like you and that jerk were. What if I put a stop to this? He's my husband, you can't sleep with him, Brenda protested. You gave me that right when you got with Bill Grant. Minx replied, that pretty much freed Brian from any obligations to you. He and I are committed to each other. We trust each other, believe it or not. Brian's been told he can't be with his friend's dad. He can't be with you or anyone else if he wants to be with me, Mink added. Who knows who else Bill Grant has been with or what diseases he might have. You could have all kinds of nasty stuff in there. Brenda cried again, thinking about Mink's words. Could Bill have been cheating with someone else? Brenda knew what kind of man Bill was now. She needed to get tested soon. So what now? Brenda asked nervously. Let's keep things the way they are. If it ain't broke don't fix it, MX replied. I won't do that, Brenda said firmly. You're leaving soon. I'll stay here and show Brian what a great wife I can be. He won't need you except he knows I'm faithful while you're out there ready for anyone, Mink argued. Basically I control your bed life, at least with Brian. I won't let him near your dirty business. One thing I've learned, albeit too late, is that there's more to a relationship than just physical intimacy, Brenda said with false confidence. Sex without love or commitment is pretty demeaning. I'll do what a wife should do for her husband, while you just give him sex. Think about that. All right, Minx replied, let me do it. You cook for him, clean the house and do his laundry. Brian, I'm so sorry for disrespecting you, can you forgive me? Brenda pleaded. How could he ever trust you again? Minx interjected, he might forgive you someday, but regaining his trust is the real challenge for cheaters. Enjoy the next few months while you're still his wife in name, realize what you've lost for a stranger and learn from it, Minx advised. Brian doesn't want to break up the family while Tim does. Why are you speaking for Brian? Brenda demanded. I'm not just his mistress, I'm his best friend, Minx explained. While you were with Bill, Brian and I had our own conversations. I promised to handle this situation when it came up. He promised to reward me when I did. Can you leave us alone now?